There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we're just going to dive right into the report. All right. Where is it? Oh, good. I can just share my whole screen again. Okay, so previously with Zoom, I wasn't able to share my whole desktop, but now it looks like I can. Is everybody able to see the report? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So the University of Michigan has given us permission to use their data in these types of presentations. So that's why we're going to be looking at U of M's report today. All of our members get their own individual report, and then we'll have an aggregate version of this available to talk about larger picture outcomes for employees of all our members. So for those of you that are members, you might remember that we have employee reports that were based on census data for the last 5 years. And that report focused on 2 aspects of research employee outcomes. One was, where do people go when they are trained in research at our universities? Where do they take that knowledge? Where do they take that training? And how do they apply it? And then the second question that we also talked about in that report was, what do these people earn and what job sectors do they go into once they leave the university? So for the first iteration of this report, what we're going to do here is mimic a lot of what we did in the census report, but with a lot more detail and a lot more nuance than we were able to do previously with that data. So the reason that we can do this, the reason we can get more in depth with the reporting and the data is because we're using a private sector data vendor now to gather this data. And with that, we had less constraints in what we can do. So we still strive to protect people's privacy. And you'll see that throughout this report, that we don't get so in the weeds and so detailed that individuals' private information can be discerned from it. But we are able to get a lot more nuanced and down into the details than we were able to do with the census data. So when we first dive into this report, the first thing we look at here are geographic destinations of research-trained employees from our universities. So the term research-trained employees encapsulates several different groups or subsets of employees. So there are the undergrad students who work on research projects. There are the grad students, master's, PhD people. There are the post-grad, postdoc researchers. There are the staff like myself, there are faculty, and then there's a group that we call other students who we recognize as students, but we didn't have enough information to place them into either the undergrads or grad category, so we put them into an other students category. And that's what you can see over here on the left-hand side of the report are the different employee types. And this will become relevant once we start looking at some of the outcome metrics a little bit lower in the report here. So the initial thing that we jump into is geographic destinations. So Michigan, because this is U of M, we've highlighted the home state. Your university, your home state would be the one that's highlighted. And then we use this color coding to sort of tell you at a high level, where are these people going once they leave your university. I think it's also worth mentioning that the data that we have previously with census, we only had data on people who left the university. Now we have data on everyone, people who left, people who stayed. And so we'll be able to tell maybe different stories with that data, but for this first iteration, we're really focused on the people who left. We've talked about adding maybe a toggle or something that would let you switch between those, and we may add that soon, but for right now, it's just the people who left. So if you move your mouse around on these maps, you will be able to see how many people go to these states. And for the first time, you can actually click on a state, like Illinois here, and it'll actually show you at the county level where people are going and how many people go there. And you can go back to the national map, you can drill down into your home state, you can see what counties they're going into. We do have data that takes us all the way down to the street level for people. And so we had talked originally about maybe having the reports drill down to the zip code level, but we found that if our goal is to preserve privacy, we wanted to cap the minimum level that we would dive down to at least 10 people. And so anything less than 10 people, we try to mask that just to protect people's privacy. So we decided that at least at this stage, the county level makes the most sense. So you can see here, you know, the top counties in the state of Michigan where U of M graduates or U of M research trained employees go when they leave the university. And we have a little metric up here at the top that tells us that roughly 40% of these people stay in the state of Michigan. So you can drill down, you can go back to the national map, you can drill down into any of the states and see where these people are going. And then as we scroll down here, we see the different states and districts listed here and the counts of number of people who go to these places. And then we start getting down into the earnings metrics and industry metrics. So in the previous report, we were limited to talking about very high level sectors. We call them super sectors. So this would be public sector, private sector, education. That was as detailed as we were allowed to get with the census data. Now with this data, we're actually able to drill down, and we decided to group everything by industry initially, just to make things a little bit easier to navigate through. So one of the things that's available here, and this is dynamically driven for every university. So when you look at Pittsburgh's reports or you look at, you know, other reports, you'll see different lists of industries where these research trained employees are going when they leave. They're ranked by total number of employees identified. So you can see, you know, U of M research trained employees who leave, most of them go into the education sector. And then you can see there's a large list of them here and it drills down. Now for convenience sake, we've limited the number of industries that can be listed in a chart to 5. So if you want to see a different one, it won't let you. It tells you that you can only have up to 5. So we have to deselect some other ones if we want to put in, say, government or finance, and it lets you change those. And you can set them any way that you want. You can, though, add any of the different employee groups that we've created to these. So you can do, you know, wide comparisons of different things. If you wanted to just focus on students, we could get rid of the non-students and we could see the student metrics here. And then one of the new features that we've added to this report, and this is a nice technical feature, you can export any of these charts. So in the past, you'd have to take a screenshot and cut and paste and stuff. Now you can just click on export chart and it downloads the chart, and then you can open it right up as an image. And there it is right there, easy to drop into a PowerPoint presentation or anything like that. So this first chart here is number of employees by employment type, by employee type, by industry. So within the education industry, we have undergrads. We've identified 730 of them that have gone into this industry. Grad students, 1565, and other students. So again, we had enough info to know they're students, but we don't know what type of students, 1,120. And we can, again, look at any of the industries that are of interest. We can order them in any way that we want. The next chart below that starts talking about their earnings. So how much do these people earn when they leave the university and they enter, you know, working for industry or other universities or things like that? We're able to dig down and identify their earnings. So you can see we've got the max and min, 75th, 25th, and median in here for earnings for these different category groups. One of the discussions that we've had both with our technical advisory group and our focus group was talking about outliers and maybe moving things around. And so we've talked about adding a toggle that would let you remove outliers or that would shift people into other employment categories. One of the things that came up was, let me show you Michigan here. Let me show you the healthcare field right here. So these are undergrads that have left the University of Michigan, and you can see in the healthcare, oh wait, that's, yeah, in the healthcare field here, we have a max earning of almost 400,000. So that, of course, raised the question, how can an undergrad be making 400,000 in healthcare? And it turns out what happened here was that Michigan gives us almost 20 years worth of data. And these categories for these people are defined as a snapshot of when they appeared in Michigan's research data. And in the case of this particular person here, they were an undergrad at U of M, but they were an undergrad roughly 18 years ago or 15 years ago. They had since gone on to get a master's, a doctorate, and had been working in the healthcare field for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. And so it makes sense that they're making, this kind of salary. And so we've been talking about different ways to deal with that. We could Windsorize the data. We could remove outliers. We could shift people into higher employment categories if that made sense. We decided for this first iteration, we're just going to keep it simple, and we're going to document these things so people understand why it's happening. But in future iterations of this report, we'll add a toggle or we'll add some sort of filter that'll allow you to adjust these so they're a little bit easier to explain or understand as we move forward.
So Kevin, this is Baron.
Yeah.
Can I ask? So
Absolutely.
I guess so. As you were discussing this, I was actually going to ask that question of, these are students, how far out from leaving the university are they? And so you just answered that by saying that Michigan gave 20 years of data. I think on other types of data sets related to student outcomes from my prior life outside of research, one simple way to do it would be to have a toggle that lets you see 2 years from graduation, 3 years, 5 years, and set that so that if you really just want to know recent, then you can do that, and I think it would be more meaningful to have that, because do we really care that someone that graduated 18 years ago is now making 400,000, or are we thinking more about our recent, like, where are they going right after they leave us, kind of thing?
We might care if they're an alumni, if they're making $400,000. Institutional advancement might care.
Yeah, they might, yeah. And then the other question is, I guess sometimes, and I might have missed it because I was multitasking, but sometimes because this is fairly new to me, some of the data that you all have, these are all employees. They're undergrad or graduate students that were employed on research grants and contracts, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I guess I don't know if the reports ever have labels that really say that. If I took one of these and then shared it with the president or something, I'd have to really make sure that I made sure they knew and understood it, that it's not all of our undergraduates, it's only the undergraduates that participated in sponsored research. So that might be just another, I kept getting confused when you kept saying, the University of Michigan undergraduates, and I'm like, is it everyone, or are we just doing research,
Right. And to be honest, those details are covered in the methodology section of the report, but you're right. Somebody would have to take the time to go into the methodology and read that and then convey that information to whomever they're sharing the reports with.
Yeah, and I know we all know it, and your subscribers would know it because they're the research domain, they're the ones participating. I just, as a newcomer, I need, I need to constantly remind myself of who's included here.
So I'll make sure that Dan, who's on this call right now, makes a note of that, because his job is messaging here. So make a note of that, Dan.
Already did.
All right, thanks.
Kevin, I have 2 questions.
Sure.
So one is, what is the other category for industries? Because that's a lot of students there.
Yeah, so the other category are industries. So I'll show you in just a second how we go from industries to individual companies, where we're able to identify where people are going and what they're earning at those individual companies. The data that we've received, not every company has been placed into an industry for variety of reasons. The number one reason is name disambiguation challenges, which we're kind of working on right now. We're hoping to have wrapped up in the next week or two. There's a lot of companies that have slightly different names in the data. So think AT&T, Atlantic Telephone and Telegraph, ATT, things like that. So some of those would have an industry associated with it, but some of those might not. So what we're trying to do is clean that up, consolidate those names, and then fill the gaps of these missing industries. So for the time being, the short-term solution is to drop these companies into an other category. But as time goes by and we clean this up, though that other category will hopefully get smaller and smaller as we shift these companies into their appropriate industries.
Great, got it, makes perfect sense. Now, what about the students who leave and go somewhere else as a student and gets a paycheck? How are you calling out that they're really employees and not continuing as trainees somewhere else?
Right. So I guess it depends on how we define what an employee is. So at least on the simple level for this, we're defining an employee as any person who is being paid to participate in research or to work on research at the University of Michigan. And so we would apply that same label to these people if they go anywhere else. So what we're really looking for are the paychecks, that they've paid taxes, that they've received some sort of pay related to working at the university if they went on to another university from here.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. And to be honest, this will get a lot easier as we add more members. Right now we can easily track the migration of people from one IRIS member university to another. So as more members join IRIS, that kind of tracking becomes easier and easier. And then we'll see here in a little bit, we'll look at the underlying data, and I'll be able to show you in the underlying data how we have educational milestones. So we do track if an undergrad leaves Michigan and gets a master's degree at Ohio State and gets a PhD at Pittsburgh, we are able to demonstrate that and track that. So we'll show you that in the data, and then we can talk about what we could possibly do with that kind of information.
So where would that individual, where would they be listed as an undergrad here because they were an undergrad at Michigan?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So it doesn't mean that's what their highest degree currently is. It's they were a Michigan undergrad and this is what they're making now, regardless of their continued progression.
Yep, that's exactly right. And these kinds of things would be, I think, relatively easy to implement. Like if you wanted a checkbox for, terminal degree or highest degree attained, we could add that to it, and then it would just shift people into their appropriate boxes down the road. So that's definitely something that could be added.
So one bit of nuance there is within your university, we do pick sort of the highest level achieved, the highest level that you show up in our data. So if someone got an undergraduate degree from U of M, then got a graduate degree from U of M and also worked on sponsor research projects there, you would show up in this report as a graduate student, not as an undergraduate. So, but yeah, once you leave the institution, we haven't sort of pulled in that sort of tracking data that Kevin will show in a bit.
Okay, so I'll continue on here. So again, within these industries, you're able to see what the earnings are for the different people, the different employment categories that we have. And then down below, this is where we start diving into the actual companies that are employing people once they leave the university. So you can see here, we're looking at grad student earnings in the education industry. And you can see the top 10 here. So one of the things I'd like to point out is, in addition to the top 10, let's say you wanted to know everything, up at the top of the report on the right-hand side, there's a download data button that if you click on it, it downloads the data into a zip file here, and then you can open it up and you could dive into that information, and you can actually see all the companies that employ people. And so some of these, right now it says 0. We're gonna change that because these ones have less than 10 people in them. And so we, right now we're just setting it to 0, but when we officially release the report, we'll have some language here that says, you know, N less than 10 or something like that, and masked for privacy. But you can see all the companies where people go. And if there's companies that didn't make it into the top 10, and I'm just kind of scrolling through here wildly. Let's see, I suppose I could filter or sort. You'll be able to identify the companies, the average earnings and the number, or the median earnings and the number of people there. So all of these charts, all the underlying data that's used to drive them are available to you, and you can use that to pull it into, I don't know, Tableau or other things if you wanted to build your own metrics, or you wanted to compare it against your data or incorporate it into your data set in some way. So in order to change this down here at the bottom, you would click within an industry and choose a particular employment type. So let's say we wanted to go into information technology in undergrads. We click on this and, oh, so nobody shows up. So again, this report's in beta. We're going to add language here that says that there is no companies with more than 10 people. So again, we're not going to show the earnings and the number of people if it's less than 10. Let me check healthcare here. So here's healthcare, Michigan Medicine, University of Michigan Health Systems, and then the rest of them would have less than 10 in each of these. Let's see here, other. So here's healthcare, Henry Ford Health Systems, again, Michigan Medicine, and it makes sense because U of M has a big medical school, so they may graduate and go there. Let's see here. University of Washington, Georgia Institute of Technology. So it'll show you the information about the companies where people go. Now, we do have a lot of company data, so if that becomes of interest, we could actually pull company data in and you could see more information about each of these companies or organizations. But for at least this first iteration of the report, we're keeping it fairly simple and straightforward. So we add postdocs in, and let's take a look here. Michigan State University, again, healthcare, information technology. Let's see, postdocs. Where are they going? Amazon and Intel. Postdocs going to Intel start out, well, are earning a median of 106, and there's between 10 and 15. So we're rounding up or down depending on how many people there are. Again, to try to obfuscate a little bit for people's privacy. So questions about that? And if not, I'll dive into the underlying data and then we can start talking about some interesting possibilities that are available.
Kevin, real quick, before you jump to other data, click on go down to the state level stuff. You haven't shown the...
Oh, yeah, sorry. So right now, Rob is right. Everything that we've demonstrated is at the national level. If we were to drill down into the state level, everything is dynamic and changes automatically. So the list of industries of where people are employed changes depending on whether you're at the national level or at the state level. And all of these metrics change as well. So you can look at the number of employees that went into education in the state of Michigan, or the amount of money that they're earning in the state of Michigan. So that's another important nuance. The company list, we've decided to do only at the national level because there's just so many companies that have less than 10 people. We weren't getting really meaningful charts down here at the state level. So we decided to drive it just at the national level. Okay, so let's go back to the national map. And now I'm going to dive into the underlying data. We can look at that a little bit. There's so many data fields that are available to us that we've not included in this report. And we're already kicking around ideas on either how to add it to the next iteration of this report or to create completely new reports based on that data. So I'm going to dive into the database here really quick. Is everybody able to see the database here? Yes, Rob, can you give me a thumbs up?
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
we
good.
can see it.
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to show you are the educational milestones. So for every person that appears in our data, we're able to mine their educational milestones. And so this is where we can identify where people go when they leave your university and what types of degrees that they're getting. So each one of these is an individual. So this IRIS ID, this is a de-identified value for a person's name. So that way we preserve their privacy again. And so we can look here at the places where they get their degrees. We can see when they are attending school at these places. So let's see, let's look at this person here. He's got a doctorate, a master's and bachelor's, or she does, and they attended school from these points. You could roughly call these graduation years when they finished their degree. You know what universities they got those at: Colorado Boulder, Technical University of Munich, so on and so forth. And we have that for every person in our data set. So we've talked about what can we do with this information. We've talked about maybe an educational footprint type of report. So you could see people who are undergrads or whatever starting point you want with your university, and then see where are they going, how many of them are going on to higher education, masters, PhDs, etc., and where are they going? Are there particular universities that you're funneling students to? Things like that. So we could talk about all kinds of different educational milestone related reports in this data. And I do want to say that we have permission from our data vendor to provide this micro level data to researchers to work on research projects. So for those of you who are IRIS members and know this, faculty researchers at your university have free access to the micro level data. And so you can have people, if they have questions and they want to learn about outcomes of things, they can dive into this micro level data. There's IRB approvals and things like that involved because, again, this is human data. But you know, you can answer a lot of interesting questions with this stuff, and this is yet another thing that's available to you through IRIS. So we've got this educational milestone data, and then we also have experience data or job history data. So we can identify now the job history of people. So, you know, this person here, this is their job history from, looks like roughly 2012 to what, 2020 to the present, essentially. We have job history for some people going back to the 70s, 1970s. You know, there's a lot of things we could talk about, career trajectories with this. We could talk about upward mobility. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities that we could talk about here. And then when we combine this data with demographic data that we have, so we have data on things like veteran status, whether or not these people were veterans. We have gender information. We're working on getting the ethnicity information, but that's a little more difficult. We should have that at some point in the future, but we're not ready to release anything with that yet. We have information on, again, where they live and all these other things, combined with educational milestones. There's a lot of interesting stories and research that could be told with this data. So any questions, thoughts, or comments there? Anything bubble up to the surface after seeing this stuff?
So I have a quick question, and you might be able to answer it really quickly, I guess. So
Yeah.
One question that bubbles up is the idea of, I know these are student data from our employees who worked in research. Has there been any thought of also collecting data on other students try to look at how successful someone is that participated in research. So for
Yep.
instance, at our institution, we're thinking about, and this is just we're thinking about for our next strategic plan, requiring that every undergraduate has some type of research experience. And so that would mean including them on a lot more sponsored projects and things like that. And so, but we don't really necessarily have data that tells us if they participate, their earnings are going to be X percent higher because of that experience compared to a student that did not do research.
Yep.
So do you have that data already, or it's just a thought to look at?
No, so it's interesting you would bring that up. So maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we piloted a project with the Census Bureau called the PSEO project. And part of that project is exactly what you're talking about. So we've already developed the underlying logic for this. What we don't have for every university are student information for the non-research set. So with the University of Michigan, Wisconsin, and some other universities, they provided us with their full student data sets. So not just the research cohort, but the standard non-research student cohort. And we were able to do exactly what you're suggesting, make those linkages, do those comparisons, things like that. So if we had that data, and we have a data set designed to bring that in, we could easily produce something like that for our members. Yeah, and that was actually one of the first questions I wanted to answer with that data set was, what's the difference in outcomes between a standard student and a research trained student?
Right.
And so it was an interesting project to work on. We never did release the results for that. It was more of a pilot with the Census Bureau, and then they took the PSEO in a different direction, which is fine. But the nuts and bolts of everything are built to accomplish that. So we just need the underlying data to make it happen. So any other thoughts or questions? And keep in mind, we have so much data available to us from the public sector, from the private sector, business data, person data, publications, patent data, data on theses and graduation and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, the data we have available to us and our ability to put them into meaningful linkages and data and reports is just limited by what our members ask us to do. So. All right. Well, if nobody has any other questions or comments, that's all I have right now. Jennifer, you're quiet, and I always like to hear what you have to say.
No, I think this is really awesome. How are you going to get the word out that this is really available for people to use? I know, like the reports we received earlier in the week, some of people at our institution received them. I didn't actually get them. Rob got them and Mike Holland, but then I heard about this. So I guess part of it's about the communication. Yep. And the suggestions on how people can be using these and helping people kind of put them into transaction. Yep. And actually into their planning, as he was talking about strategic planning, and also into day-to-day decision making.
Sure, absolutely. So we've gotten more serious about handling the communication side of our reports and of disseminating, things to the right constituencies on campus. One of the things we're doing is webinars almost roughly every other week, where we're focusing on a particular IRIS report or product. So the next one that's coming up, I think, is October. Dan, do you remember when the COVID one is happening exactly with Jay Walsh?
We're still trying to nail down a date, but I think October 15th is what we were looking at.
Okay, so on October 15th, we'll be conducting a webinar with Jay Walsh to dig into the COVID impact report that we had put together for our members, and to talk about the importance of the COVID shutdown for all the research universities in the United States. And then on October 27th, we'll be having a webinar for government relations people on campuses. So we have several reports that are used specifically for government relations at the local, state, and federal levels. And so we're going to be talking about those, and Christina Coe, who is the Vice President of Government Relations here at the University of Michigan, will be talking about how she utilizes IRIS data and reports in conveying this information. So what we're trying to do is identify constituents on all of our campuses for these particular reports, the ones that are most relevant to them, informing them of what we have and inviting them to participate in these webinars. At the same time, I'm doing sort of deep dive webinars for individual universities. So on October 13th, I'm getting together with a wide variety of people from Texas A&M who are members, and walking them through each of the reports, explaining how they work and how they are used by other IRIS members, so then they can build strategies around utilizing these reports in similar fashion.
I think that might be something we would be interested in at Pitt, is getting a deep dive that's on our reports, and me helping connect to the right people who should attend.
That sounds perfect. So I'll touch base with you outside of this meeting, and we can put something like that together.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
Thanks.
You know, because like the COVID report is a really good report for like when you're trying to take these NIH surveys and all these COGR surveys to say, okay, did you really ramp down your spending and all those kind of things? We're all making assumptions based on what we each know in our own silo, but actually getting a report that shows the actual spending and what it was being spent on and the hiring is actually quite useful.
That makes perfect sense. I agree. Good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this presentation. My goal here was to have a very informal discussion and share the data and the reports. And I'm going to be doing this more often with all of our IRIS reports and products. So I'll be sending out invites. So I hope to see you all again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.